Hi everyone! Today we're going to be discussing Jordan Abel's book, The Place of Scraps, which all of you should have read by now. I'm going to give a brief lesson just to give a little bit more context, some more depth into the book, as well as some information on erasure poetry and what that is. And then after my lesson, we're going to actually do a quick little activity where all of you are going to create your own erasure poem. And so I think this book is a perfect fit for our English First Peoples course because there are definitely direct connections to some of the course's big ideas. What comes to mind right away is that within the text, in The Place of Scraps, there's exploration in understanding Jordan Abel's identity, especially as an Indigenous writer, and also additionally, as a text written by an Indigenous author, Jordan Abel's poems provide insight into key aspects of Canada's past, present, and future. So let's get started. Before we discuss The Place of Scraps, I think it is crucial to first address Indigenous poetics. I think this quote by Indigenous writer, musician, and academic Leanne Simpson gives incredible context and insight in understanding Indigenous poetry. She says, "Meaning comes from the context rather than the content. Ultimately, knowledge is accessed through the quality of relationships and the personalized contexts collectively created. Meaning comes from the context and the process, not the content." Jordan Abel's The Place of Scraps is written through erasure. Erasure is a form of found poetry or found object art created by erasing words from an existing text within a verse and framing the result on the page as a poem. Within erasure poetry, the author obscures large portions of text to create new meaning, which is exactly what Jordan Abel does in The Place of Scraps. Jennifer Chang says that erasure poetry creates a new work whose meaning does not stand alone, but is informed by its process, by the shadow of the old document and the act of obfuscation that transforms it. Jordan Abel is a Niska poet and writer from Vancouver who currently lives and works in Edmonton, Alberta. Jordan Abel completed his PhD at Simon Fraser University and is currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta, where he teaches Indigenous literatures and creative writing. Jordan Abel uses erasure poetry in his book The Place of Scraps to address the ethnographic research done by salvage ethnographer Marius Barbeau during the early 20th century. Barbeau's work primarily focused on Tsimshian, Gitxsan, and Nisga'a cultures and communities. As an ethnographer during the early 20th century, Marius Barbeau interpreted Indigenous adaptations and incorporations of settler culture as a contamination in signs of dying cultures. This understanding also fueled many anthropologists and ethnographers to salvage as much Indigenous cultural material as possible in order to preserve Indigenous cultures, as they were assumed to eventually either vanish, assimilate, or die out. Jordan Abel's take on Marius Barbeau is that Barbeau attempted to preserve First Nations culture by relocating totem poles and potlatch items to museums and simultaneously participated in dismantling First Nations culture with the very same actions. The resulting text, which was built primarily out of erasures, was a sincere attempt to replicate my process of understanding this truly complicated and unpopular moment in history. Through Jordan Abel's Poetics of Erasure, he highlights and addresses the ways in which anthropology and ethnography were used as mechanisms to disrupt and displace First Nations cultures by cutting down and relocating totem poles and cultural belongings to museums. Within The Place of Scraps, Jordan Abel flips the notion of appropriation by highlighting specific lines and words throughout Marius Barbeau's ethnographic documents. An understanding of figurative repatriation, a term coined by anthropologist Jennifer Kramer, can be found within the book because Jordan Abel highlights different narratives and themes through erasure poetry. Jordan Abel is also repatriating his own Indigenous identity and connection to the material as a Niska person. Jordan Abel also tackles the notion of terra nullius, which is a Latin expression translating to nobody's land. Within a historical sense, this notion was used in international law to justify claims to territory through the occupation of it. Finally, by having control over Marius Barbeau's documents, Jordan Abel gives these negative assumptions new context and meaning. Now we are going to get into the activity portion of this lesson. We have discussed more in depth the themes and context in The Place of Scraps, and we are now going to create our own erasure poem. Within your poem, there should be thought and depictions of themes that are important to Indigenous peoples. Some examples of this could include the loss and affirmation of identity, healing, relationships between the individual and community, and the experience of colonization and decolonization. Using Stephen Harper's 2008 Statement of Apology to former students of Indian residential schools, we are going to create an erasure poem. After Stephen Harper gave this apology, there was criticism regarding how meaningful this apology was. As many have stated, it will take much more than an apology to help Indigenous communities move beyond Canada's dark past, as many are still facing with the direct impacts generationally from the residential school experience. For this erasure poem activity, you're first going to create an erasure poem using Stephen Harper's 2008 Statement of Apology to former students of Indian residential schools. Through erasure, you're going to depict themes and issues that are important to Indigenous peoples, but also within your erasure poem, you're going to try and give the text new or different meaning. So for this activity portion of the lesson, you all would have received a copy of the Stephen Harper 2008 apology from me. And so after you have a read through the apology, that's when you're going to actually start to erase lines or words and completely change the context or the meaning, or just completely change the apology. And so this is an example of kind of what I've done. I've blacked out words that I wanted to take away. And so I'll just quickly read you guys my poem, just to give you a little bit of an idea of how that would look. Again, it's totally just how you want to do it. And so this is how my poem goes. Sad chapter in our history, more than a century. Remove and isolate from influence homes, families, traditions, and cultures. Assimilate them into dominant culture. Assumption Aboriginal cultures were inferior and unequal. Kill the Indian in the child. Policy of assimilation. Caused great harm. Young children forcibly removed from homes. Taken far. Deprived of parents, grandparents, and communities. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis prohibited. Children died. Never returned home. Consequences profoundly negative. Lasting damage. Impact on Aboriginal culture, heritage, and language. Helpless, powerless, separation. The legacy continues to exist. Thousands of survivors. Abuse they suffered. Resilience. Strength of their cultures. Students died. Absence of apology, impediment to healing and reconciliation. Government of Canada, apologize to Aboriginal peoples. Wrong to forcibly remove children from their homes. Recognize it was wrong. Separate children, rich, vibrant cultures, traditions, void in many lives and communities. Recognize separating children from their families. Sowed the seas for generations to follow. Institutions gave rise to abuse or neglect, inadequately controlled, failing to protect. Suffer abuses as children, powerless to protect. Burden has been far too long, no place in Canada. Recovering from this experience, very real. Lasting journey. Canada, ask for forgiveness for failing profoundly. Reconciliation, sad legacy. Years of survivors, communities. New beginning, move forward. Educate all Canadians. Positive step to new relationship. Relationship, shared history, respect for others. Move forward together. Strong families, strong communities, vibrant cultures, stronger. So that's just an example of just some themes or ideas that I wanted to pull from this apology. that I think were initially glossed over or missed when the apology was given. So that's just kind of a sense or an idea on how that would look. So I'm really looking forward to how you all do that. After you guys create your erasure poems, I just want you guys to spend 10 minutes to think about this guiding question. How can we apply what we've learned in this class to the activity we just did and from Jordan Abel's book, The Place of Scraps? All right, guys, and that is it for this lesson on The Place of Scraps. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed our erasure poem activity. I really enjoyed doing this lesson with all of you, and I hope that you guys really felt like you got some really valuable themes and context and information from the book and just from the lesson. So thank you. Hej Sepka.